So address of delivery is nothing but the address of recipient mentioned in the tax invoice generated by a registered supplier is called address of delivery. So the total sales happened for a particular duration is called aggregate turnover. The existing provisions contained in section 92A of the Income Tax Act to provide as to when two enterprises shall be deemed to be associated enterprises. Hello everyone, I am Arun Kumar, lecturer in Department of Commerce and Management, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. Dear students, welcome to the very first session on unit number 2, that is definitions. So what is this definitions? So this definitions is all about the definitions or the terminologies which are comes under goods and services tax, that is GST. So dear students, in this particular unit we are going to learn few definitions and the meaning of that particular terminologies. So let us move into the subject. The first terminology is about address of delivery. So address of delivery, it's a terminology what we used in GST. So here, the address of delivery is explained under section 2 subsection 2 of GST Act 2017. So what this section 2 subsection 2 says? It says address of delivery means the address of recipient of goods or services or both indicated on the tax invoice issued by a registered person for delivery of such goods or services or both. So address of delivery is nothing but the address of the recipient of the goods who's ordered the goods or the address of the recipient mentioned on the tax invoice by the registered dealer, that means the registered supplier. For example, Mr. A and Mr. B. So Mr. A is a supplier and Mr. B is a buyer or recipient. Okay. So here Mr. A sells the goods. Mr. A sells the goods to Mr. B. Right. So now here the address of delivery is address of Mr. B. That is the recipient or the buyer or the consumer of purchasing the product. So address of delivery is nothing but the address of recipient mentioned in the tax invoice generated by a registered supplier is called address of delivery. Next terminology. So the next terminology is aggregate turnover. Yes, aggregate turnover is explained under section 2 and subsection 6 of GST Act 2017. So what this section says about aggregate turnover? Aggregate turnover means the aggregate value of all taxable supplies. Aggregate value of all taxable supplies excluding the value of inward supply on which tax is payable by a person on reverse charge basis. So exempt supplies, exports of goods or services or both, and interstate supplies of persons having the same permanent account number to be computed on all Indian basis but excludes central tax, state tax, union territory and integrated tax and cess. So what is this aggregate turnover? In a simple meaning, you can say aggregate turnover is nothing but sales. Aggregate turnover is nothing but sales. So the total sales happened for a particular duration is called aggregate turnover. So in aggregate turnover, what we are supposed to consider? Only the sales. Okay, only the sales we are supposed to consider. Whether it is a export or whether it is an exempted supply or whether it is taxable supply or interstate supply, whatever the supply is. But if it is a sales, if it is sold by the supplier, then it is supposed to be considered for computation of aggregate turnover, except the GST paid, that is CGST, SGST, IGST and cess, except this paid, except the GST paid, other all items are supposed to be included for aggregate turnover. All items is nothing but all the sales are supposed to be included, whether it is an exempted supply or zero rated supply or exports, all the sales should be included to compute the aggregate turnover under section 2 subsection 6 of CGST Act. Moving further, agriculturist. So who is called agriculturist? So according to section 2 subsection 7 of GST Act 2017, agriculturist is nothing but agriculturist means an individual or a Hindu undivided family who undertakes cultivation of land. So the first definition is any individual or any Hindu undivided family who undertakes the activity of cultivation of land, who undertakes the activity of cultivation of land by own labor. That means by family members, by taking family members as laborers for cultivation activities, or by the labor of family, okay, the family, or if it is a Hindu undivided family, if it is HUF, including all the family members for work, for cultivational activities, that is for agricultural work, or by servants on wages payable in cash or in kind, or by hired labor under personal supervision or personal supervision of any member of the family. So agriculture is nothing but any individual person or any HUF family who undertakes the cultivation activities is called the agriculturist. And if he uses the own labor or family members as laborers, or by servants by giving them cash or taking the service in kind, or the family members supervising the servants by giving them cash or in kind, that person is called agriculturist. So that person should do the agricultural activities, the cultivation activities, and if he is using the own labor or the family members as laborers or servants, that person is called agriculturist. So why this terminology is most important in GST? Because agriculture is exempt from tax, right? So they need not to pay tax. So only for the genuine farmers it is exempted from tax. For others who are taking the people and work, making them to work on contract basis, for them it is taxable. For the actual farmer, for the actual agriculturist, it is exempted. So with that intention, we should have to know what is the meaning of agriculturist to compute the tax with respect to whatever the crops they grow. Next one, associated enterprise. Yes, associated enterprise. It is explained under section 2, subsection 12 of GST Act 2017. So what is this associated enterprise? So associated enterprises shall have the same meaning as assigned to it in section 92A of the Income Tax Act 1961. That means whatever the Income Tax Act 1961 defined under section 92A about associated enterprise, it means the same under GST also. So what is that explained under section 92A of Income Tax Act 1961 about associated enterprise? So it says the existing provisions contained in section 92A of the Income Tax Act to provide as to when two enterprises shall be deemed to be associated enterprises. It is proposed to amend subsection 2 of the said section to clarify that the mere fact of participation by one enterprise in the management or control or capital of the other enterprise, or the participation of one or more persons in the management or control or capital of both the enterprises shall not make them associated enterprises unless the criteria specified in subsection 2 are fulfilled. Yes, associated enterprise is nothing but the same company will be having different branches. It is called associated enterprises. Here you can see provisions contains in section 92A of the Income Tax Act to provide as to when two enterprises shall be deemed to be associated enterprise. Yes, two enterprises are deemed to be associated enterprise. That means if the same party, if the same person is running the business, then if he is running the different businesses, then both the businesses are called associated enterprise. That means they are interlinked together. Both the different businesses are interlinked together. That is called associated enterprise. Moving further, business. So what is the meaning of business? So it is explained under section 2 subsection 17. So business is explained under section 2 subsection 17 of GST Act 2017. So business includes, so what is this word business includes? It includes any trade, commerce, manufacture, profession, occasion, adventure, wager or any other similar activities, whether or not it is for a pecuniary benefit. Yes, here any trade, commerce, manufacturing activity, profession, adventure, whatever they'll do, everything will be called as business with respect to GST. So any activity or transaction in connection with or incidental or ancillary to A, that is subpoint A, that is above. So any activities relating to subpoint A, that is any activity relating to trade, any activity relating to commerce, any activity relating to manufacturing. So all the other related activities are called businesses. So any activity or transaction, the nature of A, that is above point A, whether or not there is volume, frequency, continuity or regularity of such transactions. So again, if any transactions with respect to relating to point A of this definition business will be called as business with respect to section 2 subsection 17, and also supply or acquisition of goods including capital goods or services in connection with the commencement or closure of businesses. Yes, supply of any goods, supply or acquisition of any goods or services will be also called as business. Next, provision by a club. Next, association, society or any such body for the subscription or any other consideration of the facilities or benefits to its members as the case may be. Yes, if any club is collecting the fees for providing the activities, that is also called a business. If any club is collecting the money for giving some facilities or to conduct some activities, that will be also called as business. And admission for a consideration of persons to any premises. Yes, if you are admitting any person by taking some money for any premises, that is also called a business. For example, you are running a hotel business. So what you will do to rent, to give him accommodation, you are going to charge some rent. So it is also called a business, right? So you have a park. What you will do? You collect 20 rupees to enter that person into a park. So you are going to collect 20 rupees as entry fees to that person. So that is also called a business. Next, services supplied by a person as the holder of an office which has been accepted by him in the course or furtherance of the trade, profession or occasion. So that means services supplied by a person as the holder of an office. So if any services are provided by a person who is holding the office, that is also called as businesses. So any kind of activities what we've seen so far, if all the activities are done by any individual person or by a company, those activities will be considered as business. Next one, GST Council. So GST Council is a constitutional body for making recommendations to the union and state government on issues related to goods and services tax, that is GST. So GST Council, it is a recognized constitutional body. It is a recognized constitutional body for making recommendations. Yes, for making recommendations to state and central government with respect to the issues relating to GST. That constitutional body is called GST Council. And the tax, that is the GST Council, is chaired by the Union Finance Minister and other members or the Union State Ministers of Revenue or Finance and ministers in charge of finance or taxation of all the states. So here in GST Council, who is going to head the GST Council? the finance minister, that is central finance minister, union finance minister is going to head the GST Council. Under union finance minister, so other members are union state ministers. Yes, union state minister of revenue or finance minister of state or minister of in charge of finance or taxation of all the states. So all the states finance ministers or in charge finance minister for all the states are going to be the members of GST Council. So GST Council is a constitutional body where they are going to give the solutions or the suggestions to the government, that is central government and the state government. So in GST Council, so the union finance minister is going to be the chairman, and under him the other state finance ministers or in charge finance ministers are going to be the members. Next one, debit note and credit note. So what is this debit note and credit note? When goods supplied are returned or when there is a revision in the invoice value due to goods or services not being up to the mark or extra goods being issued, a debit note or credit note is issued by the supplier and receiver of the goods and services. Yes, here the debit note or a credit note can be issued in two situations. See, debit note and credit note are issued by a supplier to the buyer. So in what situations this debit note and credit note will be issued? So what is this debit is called? What is debit? So debit is nothing but withdrawing or deducting, right? So what the supplier is supposed to do? Supplier is supposed to charge 10% tax. Okay, for example, he is supposed to charge 10% tax, but how much he charged? He charged 8%. You were supposed to charge 10% tax, he charged only 8% of tax. So what he is supposed to do? He is supposed to issue a debit note to the recipient, to the buyer of the product, by stating that I am supposed to charge 10% of tax. Instead of that, by mistake, I have charged only 8% of tax. So now you are supposed to pay back the remaining 2% of tax amount. That means if the supplier is charging less than the actual tax rate, or less than the actual value of the product, at that time the debit note will be issued. So when the debit note will be issued? When the supplier charges less than the actual tax rate or less than the actual value of the product, at that time debit note will be issued. That is the first scenario. What is the second scenario? When the supplier charges more than the actual GST rate and more than the actual value of the product. When the supplier charges more than the actual GST rate and more than the actual value of the product, at that point of time he will be issuing the credit note. So these are all the two scenarios where the supplier is going to issue the debit note and credit note to the recipient of the product. Next, deemed exports. So deemed exports refers to supply of goods manufactured in India and not services which are notified as deemed export under section 147 of the CGST and SGST Act 2017. So what are these deemed exports? Deemed exports refers to supply of goods manufactured in India which are as deemed exports under section 147 of CGST and SGST Act of 2017. So deemed exports are those supplies of goods that are notified as deemed exports where the goods supplied do not leave India. When the goods supplied and if it is not leave India, then it is supposed to be considered as deemed exports. Next, payment for such supplies is received in India or in Indian rupees convertible for foreign exchange. Yes, convertible for foreign exchange. So if the payment is received in India in Indian rupees and if it is convertible to foreign exchange, then it is also supposed to be considered as deemed exports. Next, such goods are manufactured in India. Yes, if the exporting goods are manufactured in India, then it is deemed to be exports. Electronic credit ledger. So what is this electronic credit ledger? The electronic credit ledger reflects the amount of input tax credit available to the taxpayers. Yes, electronic credit ledger is going to reflect what is the input tax credit available in your account, in your GST account. So if you are a manufacturer, if you are registered with the GST authority, they are going to give you a unique number, GSTIN number, that is Goods and Service Tax Identification Number. So if you enter that identification number in GST portal through online, a portal will open, okay, a portal will open in GST website. In that portal, you can see this electronic credit ledger. So what you can see in electronic ledger? In electronic credit ledger, you can see what is the input tax credit balance have in your account. So thus, every claim of input tax credit of the registered taxpayer eligible for claiming such a credit is credited to this ledger. The amount available in the electronic credit ledger is utilized in making payment towards outward tax liability by registered taxpayer. So what will happen? You are going to purchase some product. You are a manufacturer, you are going to purchase some inputs. So on those inputs, what you are going to do? You are going to pay tax. Like say you purchased the goods worth rupees 10,000, okay, and you paid tax of 1,000 rupees. Okay, on purchase of 10,000 worth goods, you pay tax of 1,000 rupees. So you convert it into a finished goods and you are selling the finished goods for rupees 25,000. For how much you are selling? For 25,000. On 25,000, you are supposed to pay 2,500 rupees of tax. Okay, while purchase the input, that is raw material, you are supposed to pay 1,000 rupees. Now you are selling the final product. So by converting the raw material into finished goods, you are supposed to pay 2,500. So what you will do, you are going to set off this 1,000 which is already paid at the time of purchasing the input, and you are going to pay the remaining amount of rupees 1,500. Okay, you are going to set off this 1,000. So this 1,000 will be reflected in your electronic credit ledger. So that is called electronic credit ledger. So whatever the input tax you have paid, that will be reflected in electronic credit ledger. So this is all about electronic credit ledger. Next, exempt supplies. So what is this exempt supplies? GST exempt supplies is the supply of goods and services which do not attract goods and services tax, also as no claim on ITC. For example, bread, fresh fruits and fresh milk. Yes, exempted supplies or exempted supply under GST is all about the goods which will not attract the GST is called exempted supply. For example, fresh milk, fresh fruits and bread, on this there is no tax, it is exempted supply. That means they are imposing zero rate supply and there is no input tax credit is available for exempted supplies because they are not paying the tax at all. Next, section 2 subsection 47 under the GST Act defines the concept of exempt supply. Exempt supply is the supply of any goods or services which have nil tax rate or fully exempted under section 11 or under section 6 of the Integrated Goods and Services Tax Act, that is IGST Act. It also includes the non-taxable supply. Yes, exempted supplies are nil rated supplies or fully exempted supplies or zero rated supplies. Those supplies are called exempted supplies with respect to GST. Next, input. So what is this input? Input, it is nothing but capital goods used. So inputs is nothing but other than the capital goods used or intended to be used by you in the business or in the course or furtherance of the business. That is called input. So input is nothing but any goods used for the furtherance of the business other than the capital goods is called inputs. For example, you are running a business or you are running a manufacturing unit. So you are going to purchase some raw materials which are required to produce the products. So that raw materials are called inputs. Next, and the taxes paid on inward supply of inputs, capital and services are called input taxes. These may be include integrated GST or central or state GST or union GST. So whatever the tax you are going to pay on those inputs, that is on raw materials, that tax is going to be the input tax. Okay, whatever the tax, whether it is IGST, CGST, SGST or UTGST, whatever the tax you are paying on purchasing of those inputs, it is called input tax. Input services, section 2, subsection 53. So under the GST regime, input services means any service used or intended to be used by a supplier in the course or furtherance of the business. Yes, services used or intended to be used by a supplier in the course or furtherance of the business. So if any services are used or intended to be used by the supplier, that is called input services. Next, input service distributor. Who is called input service distributor? An input service distributor is a business which receives invoices for services used by its branches. Yes, it is a company or it's a business where they will be receiving the invoices for services received by the branches, different branches. They will be having different branches, and different branches are going to give services for the other people or for the required people or for the recipient. At the end of the month, they'll raise the invoice and they'll send it to the head office. So here head office is called input service distributor. So according to the bill claimed by the branches, they are going to distribute the input tax to each branch. That is called input service distributor. So I hope all of you understood the today's explanation with respect to GST definitions, that is terminologies, the different terminologies with respect to the goods and services tax. In the upcoming classes, we will also going to discuss few more definitions which are relating to GST. So until then, thank you all. Have a nice day. Namaste.